Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise was born the 15th of August 1950. She is a member of the British royal family. She is the second child and only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and the only sister of King Charles III. Anne was born third in the line of succession to the British throne and is now 17th, and has been, since 1987. Princess Anne is arguably the most relatable member of the royal family. Not only is she not afraid to break some royal rules occasionally, but she's also not your typical princess. In fact, it might be safe to compare Anne to her late aunt, Princess Margaret. Like Margaret, Anne is a bit of a royal rebel, and she definitely doesn't embody the classic royal stereotype of a timid princess. Royals. Princess Anne inherited Queen Elizabeth II's stoicism and dry wit, but beneath her cool demeanor, there's a warmth only those closest to her get to see. She's a gem, truly one of the nicest and most hardworking of them all, a years-long Buckingham Palace employee told Vanity Fair. Being a royal is not the only thing Anne is good at. She's also an accomplished equestrian and will likely ace an advanced driving test. From sneaking out of the palace to racking up a criminal record, blending in with the masses on public transport, and telling an armed criminal to bugger off, it might be safe to say that Princess Anne is the most audacious royals around. Anne might once have been King Charles III's spare, but she's shown herself to be invaluable to the monarchy, especially amid the king's recent cancer diagnosis. While boarding school is many kids' worst nightmare, Princess Anne couldn't wait to leave the palace halls to do just that. The only problem was that it was tradition for female members of the royal family to attend school at home. Even Queen Elizabeth II, for all her accomplishments, never attended boarding school. Princess Anne followed in her mother's footsteps at first, receiving her education within the walls of Buckingham Palace with Catherine Peebles, her governess. But, the moment she was old enough to be admitted to boarding school, Anne jumped at the chance. Even though her brother, King Charles III, had a less than great experience at boarding school, Anne remained undeterred. "I was ready to go to school. I had a governess and 2 friends, and that was never going to be enough, really. So I was only too pleased to be sent off somewhere else," the Princess Royal told Vanity Fair in an interview. "I think boarding school has been demonized by some when, in fact, it's a very important aspect to have available, and many children actually thrive in it," she explained. Anne attended Benenden School in Kent from 1963 until 1968, obtaining 2 A-levels and 6 O-levels. Becoming the first female royal to attend boarding school was only the first of many accomplishments for Princess Anne. The Princess Royal has a great love for horse riding, and she became an accomplished equestrian in her youth. In fact, that she ended up competing at the Olympics in Montreal in 1976 with Queen Elizabeth II's horse, Goodwill. While she didn't win a medal, she boasts 3 European Championship medals. Speaking about it, Anne admitted that if she hadn't been bound by royal duties, she would probably have pursued an equestrian career. "I thought if I was going to do anything outside of the royal family, horses was likely to be the best way of doing it," she said. "But then you have to find the right horse at the right time. The original horse I rode was bred as a polo pony and should never have been an event horse, but it worked, so that was very satisfying. But I always knew it was going to be limited time." However, Anne made the most of her time in the Olympic spotlight, and in 1988, the International Olympic Committee appointed her as one of its members. As director of the London Organizing Committee of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, Anne also had a hand in ensuring that London won its bid to host the Olympic Games in 2012. Princess Anne likes fast cars. She loves them so much, in fact, that she once snuck out of the palace to race one. In 1971, Anne and Formula One champion Sir Jackie Stewart took a road trip to race a sports car in Silverstone without Queen Elizabeth II knowing a thing. While Anne and Stewart were chatting via video call for the latter's dementia charity, the two spoke candidly about the day. Stewart recalled that Anne wasn't exactly happy that he was the one driving them to Silverstone when he picked her up at Windsor. The car the two were driving in was, in Stewart's words, a very hot British touring championship car. No wonder Anne was itching to take the wheel. Stewart said that he always knew Anne to prefer the driver's seat. "You drive more than any other lady I know. You were always keen to be behind the wheel, that was for sure," he said. Anne later admitted that she's not the world's best passenger. Once the two arrived at the track, Stewart allowed Anne to have some fun, and it turned out that the royal didn't even need much coaching. She was pretty much a natural, and Stuart eventually lost count of the laps she took around the track. A picture taken on the day was kept out of the press at the time because Buckingham Palace didn't have any knowledge of Anne's little outing. Stuart recalled Anne being a tad late to an event once, and when he asked her what the hold-up was, she told him that she'd been cleaning stables. "And I thought, for God's sake, the princess was cleaning out stables. I don't really think that was appropriate," Stuart said. Anne merely grinned, explaining that her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, taught them from a young age that owning a horse meant you had to take care of it, too. "We were brought up that way," Anne said. "If you had ponies and horses, if you rode, you had to understand about them and what they needed. The first thing you did and the last thing you did was to look after them." She added that her mother was very strict regarding this. She wasn't allowed to simply ride her horses and then leave them to be taken care of afterward by palace staff. It was her responsibility to do all the dirty work as well. An incident took place in 1974. Anne was traveling to Buckingham Palace after attending an event when a man named Ian Ball fired shots at her vehicle, injuring the driver. A nearby journalist and 2 police officers also suffered gunshot wounds. Anne, however, remained perfectly calm. Ball approached her and told her that he was going to kidnap her and demand a £2 million ransom, which he said would be donated to the NHS. Anne wasn't impressed or intimidated. When Ball told her to get out of the car, she reportedly shot back, "Not bloody likely." He said, "I had to go with him. I can't remember why. I said I didn't think I wanted to go. I was scrupulously polite because I thought it was silly to be too rude at that stage," she recalled during an interview on Parkinson in Australia, adding that she asked him to be on his way so they could forget about the whole ordeal. Anne reported that the only time she got upset was when her dress got torn during the incident, which, in her words, "made me lose my rag." Police managed to dissolve the situation, and Anne went home without a scratch and with a killer reputation. Princess Anne and Sir Timothy Lawrence's love story is the kind you see in movies. Lawrence was Queen Elizabeth II's equerry, a fancy name for an assistant, and he and Anne met within the palace walls and fell madly in love. The only issue was that Anne was already married to Mark Phillips. That relationship didn't last, however. There were whispers that both had engaged in extramarital affairs throughout their marriage, and things quickly escalated when the Sun was sent love letters Lawrence wrote to Anne, stolen out of her briefcase. Instead of breaking the story of the year, the tabloid chose to hand the letters over to the police, sparing Anne and Lawrence the embarrassment of having their private conversations leaked to the public. Anne's marriage to Phillips ended shortly after. Prince Philip was reportedly livid that Lawrence had gotten involved with his daughter, but Queen Elizabeth was more forgiving. Anne and Lawrence got married shortly after her divorce from Phillips was finalized, but it wasn't a simple process. In those times, members of the royal family weren't exactly allowed to remarry in the Church of England if their ex-spouse was still alive. Anne, ever practical, married Lawrence in a church in Scotland, which didn't adhere to the same rules. Remarrying after her divorce effectively made Anne the first member of the British royal family to ever do so. Princess Anne is a living legend in more ways than one. Many think that Princess Diana broke the tradition of giving birth at home, but Princess Anne actually made that history. Most importantly, she's the one who started the tradition of giving birth at St. Mary's Hospital's Lindo Wing and posing on the steps with your newborn. Yup, turns out Diana was just following in Anne's footsteps. When Anne gave birth to her firstborn, Peter Phillips, in 1977 at the Lindo Wing. She didn't pose with him on the steps, however. She set this tradition when she gave birth to her second child, Zara Phillips, now Tyndall, in 1981. Anne wasn't accompanied by her husband, Mark Phillips, as she smiled at photographers, but it was an iconic moment nonetheless. About a year later, Princess Diana and then Prince Charles posed on the same steps with Prince William after Diana gave birth at the Lindo Wing. The tradition continued when Prince Harry was born, and Prince William and Princess Catherine have since followed suit. In another break with royal tradition, Princess Anne chose not to give her children royal titles. When rumors were swirling that this was the case, many found it hard to believe and were surprised when the palace confirmed it. In true Buckingham Palace style, the public wasn't told why Anne and her husband had decided to forfeit their children's titles. Still, the speculation was that Anne and Phillips didn't want their children constrained by the monarchy. It turns out those rumors were mostly accurate. Speaking to Vanity Fair in 2020, Princess Anne finally explained her decision. I think it was probably easier for them, and I think most people would argue that there are downsides to having titles. So I think that was probably the right thing to do, she said.